The far right has never had it so good in Britain. The most senior counter-terrorism police officer has said that the febrile atmosphere created by Brexit could radicalise potential far-right extremists. And convicted criminal Stephen Yaxley-Lennon, also known as Tommy Robinson, has convinced thousands of people that being held to account for breaking the law makes him a victim and a martyr. It's widely accepted that we have been too slow to act in the face of the hate that is gripping this country. So news that Lennon will no longer be able to profit from his poisonous YouTube posts is welcome. The Google-owned social media site, alongside PayPal, banned him last week from profiting in response to, among other things, a video celebrating him punching a migrant. I believe in freedom of speech. But our constitution in Britain, the Britain far-right extremists claim to feel so patriotic about, is based on the rule of law, which makes inciting hatred a crime. It's about time we began to apply it.
So, Afua, I don't think anything I heard you say there I can disagree with specifically, but I want to broaden the conversation out a bit. I do worry that, first of all, I don't think it's a free speech issue because YouTube is a privately owned company. It can choose its own terms of service. What I worry about are related issues. One is what I have been calling a cultural bias online, and that is that the tech giants, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, the social media companies, YouTube, and others, are very quick and very responsive to what they perceive as racism and far-right extremism online. And yet, meanwhile, so for example, Twitter took Tommy Robinson down. It also took down Milo Yiannopoulos, and Carl Benjamin and a few others have been removed from Twitter. Meanwhile, Twitter, the same company, still has operating officially terrorist organizations such as Hamas and Hezbollah. And they still have accounts in English and in Arabic. And the examples continue beyond violence to even just mere, when I say mere, legal forms of Islamist extremism. And I think the inconsistency present on social media companies, and this is just on the Islamist extremism debate, can also then further fuel the far right. And I think the second point is these tech companies such as YouTube have been terribly slow generally in taking things down. And if we look at this, look at how much they earn. So a company like YouTube, so more than 1 billion hours of YouTube videos are watched every day. Now that turns into, according to some estimates, $8 billion in revenue in 2015. Now, if you earned, as a company, just YouTube, not Google as a whole, Alphabet, but just the YouTube division of Alphabet, which is the new name for Google, if you earn that much money and you can't be bothered to hire people to A, put down a consistent and transparent policy, and then B, enforce it, and you look at the number of, for example, paedophilic or semi-paedophilic videos on YouTube. It's disgusting that what these companies have been allowed to get away with.
You were talking about inconsistencies. I think there's also a hypocrisy around YouTube because Tommy Robinson and his ilk have had, as you just said before, they've had free rein for a very long time, and YouTube have made lots of money out of that, and they've been throwing adverts onto his site for a very long time, and all of a sudden they've decided it's wrong. But I don't know whether you've heard of a woman called Nadine Strossen. She's a scholar, an American scholar, and she's written a book called Hate, and it's about hate speech and its effects. And she says, speech is, I just want to read the quote, speech is powerful and can inflict pain, but the cure of censorship is worse than the disease of hate. She said, worse than speech's potential to harm individuals and society is the government's power to do likewise by enforcing hate speech laws. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. And if we're, shouldn't a nation of adults be confident enough in its capacity to defeat terrible opinions in an open marketplace, because then they become powerless, rather than force them underground, where they become more powerful?
Can I challenge you on that? If they're adults, yes. But if you come back to the point that Afua made about Neil Basu, and he's the National Police Lead for Counter-Terror, and he's the Met's Assistant Commissioner for Counter-Terror, and he responded to the fact that it's primary school children now who are being... And on both sides, not just the far right, but, sorry, not both sides, all sorts of areas. Primary school children. Yes, adults probably are, hopefully, well enough educated to process, and those who are sane can reject... Primary school children are being deliberately targeted by these. Let me just get a legal out and just say, and that is where I think we've got a major problem, and that is where you're absolutely right. Sky News couldn't put out this sort of unchecked material. LBC, we couldn't broadcast. The Daily Mirror couldn't, but they'd be closed down. And none of those organisations make that kind of money. Let me say, we have to say what YouTube says, because we've mentioned them a lot. Let me just get this, and then I promise I'll yield. We have suspended ads on Tommy Robinson's YouTube channel as it breaches our advertising policies. YouTube said it believes strongly in free freedom of expression, but it had a responsibility to protect its community of creators, viewers and advertisers from what it called derogatory and disparaging content. There's no official comment from Mr Robinson, but he said it's all continued censorship.
I think we can all agree that this is a question of balance. I mean, I used to be a lawyer who worked on free speech cases. I believe very strongly in what you say, Carol, that we do need a free marketplace of ideas. We don't want to censor people who we find difficult. Free speech is meaningless unless it's the freedom to say things that people don't like to hear, right? So I completely agree. But that's also why we have laws that protect us against speech that is designed to incite hatred. And, you know, I think you're right, Majid. There's not a level of application among different hate groups. But what happens online is the mirror opposite of real life, in which there has been more concerted police action towards some kinds of extremism than there has towards the far right. And that's why I think people are now acknowledging we've been too slow. I'm going to bring Phil in, but I just want to read you... I want to just read you what Hope Not Hate say about this, which is that the far right are utterly reliant on social media and crowdfunding platforms to keep their coffers plump. YouTube made the right choice, but all too often they and others are far too slow in reacting when these PayPal patriots take to the airwaves to spread their poison and bile.
Right. I'm of a mind with this, that if you take Tommy down, you've got to take down Hamas, you've got to take down all these other people as well, which they don't. So that's my first point. The second point is, when you've still got people like Diane Abbott who won't acknowledge that what she said about the IRA and her comments were exact. I think she said something about her hair style has changed, but her views have as well. It's not good enough. I think Tommy gets hung, drawn and quartered for a past that he's had.
Are you comparing Diane Abbott to Tommy Robinson, Phil?
They both got checkered pasts as far as I'm concerned, and I don't like what Diane Abbott says, and you don't like what Tommy says.
No, that's not fair. Tommy Robinson has
Diane Abbott's not broken. Hold on, Diane Abbott's not broken the law. There's quite a...
Tommy's not broken the law as a racist. He's broken the law, but not as a racist.
He has multiple
criminal
convictions. He is being taken down because he's been found to be breaking standards on...
What are those standards? What are those standards? Because if he can say that, surely, you know, there's other people like Hamas and that touting their wares on there that they say.
So I think that question there is
What's your boundaries?
The tech companies don't put out transparent standards. That's part of the problem.
That is the whole issue.
That doesn't mean,
and
that doesn't mean that certain people shouldn't have been taken down. It means, at least if we know what those standards are, we can then have this. Part of the problem is we can't have this conversation, because when YouTube took down, our patron recently took down Carl Benjamin that Twitter first banned, they refused to say why they did so.
So they should be asked, or they should be made to say why.
You agree with YouTube suspending Tommy Robinson's account, don't you?
Do I agree with it? I don't know what for. I don't know why they've suspended it. What have they said? You're saying that he's been making, you know...
For incite,
Incite... What's he actually said that's incited any violence? What's he actually said that's incited violence?
Are you familiar with the story, and Majid covered it very well, of this refugee boy, Jamal, from a Syrian refugee family, who was abused and waterboarded in the playground?
I don't know the story,
remind me where it was, Majid.
Huddersfield.
In Huddersfield. Well, you don't remember that story, and it prompted a huge outpouring of sympathy for the family, and money was raised to relocate them. And it turned out his sister had also been bullied and abused at school. Tommy Robinson took to social media to promote something which was later found to be untrue, that this boy had been abusing white English girls. And he's being sued for it. And I just want to make the point, by the way, that Tommy Robinson's, one of his main strategies is to shut down other people, using threats of libel. He goes around threatening other people who have spoken freely and claiming that they have libelled him and he wants to sue them.
So the
idea that he's the kind of defender of free speech is a complete inconsistency.
Where do these lines in the sand get drawn? Who draws them and who regulates them? Who regulates them?
Well, these are private companies. They can define their own terms, but at least we need to know what those terms are so we don't fall foul of them. But currently they're a bit opaque. But they have the right to do so, Phil, because they're private companies.
And I'm going to close down this conversation. I sense it shall return because we move on to other matters.